Chicago had always been one of those cities that carried a certain kind of energy for me. I had been there many times before, mostly for conferences, investor meetings, or quick stopovers. The glass towers, the endless flow of taxis, the Lake Michigan winds cutting through the streets. It all carried a rhythm of ambition and urgency. That morning, as I entered the hotel ballroom where our agency's quarterly presentation was about to unfold, I felt the familiar blend of nerves and focus. I had rehearsed the numbers, double-checked the market data, and was ready to watch our strategy roll out. The room was large, high ceilings with chandeliers that looked borrowed from an old opera house, but modernized with subtle spotlights aimed at the stage. Rows of chairs were neatly aligned, each with printed agendas and branded pens. The giant LED screen behind the podium flickered with the agency's logo, the familiar blue gradient slowly pulsing. I chose a seat midway down the center aisle, close enough to the front to catch nuances on the presenters' faces, but not so close as to seem like I was desperate for attention. My wife, Stephanie, was scheduled to be part of the opening team, not the star speaker, but the one guiding transitions between segments. As the lights dimmed slightly and the first slide appeared, my mind wandered briefly. I thought of how polished Stephanie always was in these settings. Confident, radiant, perfectly attuned to the rhythm of corporate theater. She thrived in rooms like this, and yet, beneath that admiration, I carried a quiet unease, something that had been whispering at me for weeks but never fully formed into words. It was like a low hum, almost too faint to hear, but present nonetheless. The first few minutes went smoothly. Charts about projections, bullet points about new partnerships, applause lines about expanded reach. I glanced around at the rows of colleagues and partners, their faces glowing in the light of their tablets as they snapped notes or emailed their assistants. Then it happened. The screen stuttered, not the clean flow of a slide deck, but the hesitation of a file error. A black rectangle appeared, followed by a flicker of pixels. And then, sharp, sudden, intrusive, a photograph filled the screen. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but as the image resolved, the air around me seemed to collapse. Stephanie was on the screen. My wife, my partner, the person I had trusted implicitly. She was in a hotel bathroom, unmistakably in the embrace of another man. His face was partially obscured, turned toward her shoulder, but hers was undeniable. The curve of her smile, the strands of her dark hair falling across her cheek, the exact shade of Berg *NDY nail polish she had applied just days earlier. The details screamed at me. The heavy marble tiles behind her, the chrome faucet, the signature toiletries with the hotel's logo. It was the very same property where the evening's networking reception was scheduled. I recognized the decor instantly because I had booked us a suite there just 2 months ago during another round of meetings. Even the folded hand towel on the counter was arranged the same way, embroidered with the same crest. There was no doubt. I felt my chest tighten. My mind rushed to rationalize. Maybe it was old, maybe it wasn't what it seemed, maybe it was a trick of timing. But the evidence was too aligned. The nail polish was new. The hotel was current. The int * Macy between them was not casual. It was practiced, familiar, impossible to mistake. Around me, the audience reacted in fragments. A few gasps, a nervous laugh from someone in the back. A couple of people leaned in to whisper to their neighbors. Others sat frozen, eyes darting between the screen and Stephanie, who was standing just off stage with her clipboard. For a fraction of a second, her expression faltered. I caught it, the flicker of recognition, the tightening of her jaw, the sudden narrowing of her eyes. But then, as if a switch had been flipped, she transformed. With the poise of a seasoned professional, she stepped forward, raised her hand in a mock-dramatic gesture, and chuckled. "Well," she said to the crowd, her voice amplified and smooth, "looks like someone's private files made it into the wrong folder. That's what happens when you don't name things properly." The audience gave a strained laugh, more out of obligation than amusement. She kept going, weaving it into a story about the importance of organization in business, pivoting seamlessly into the next agenda point. It was, on the surface, flawless. She turned what could have been a disaster into a quirky anecdote. The tension in the room softened. People glanced back at their phones, refocused on the slides, returned to nodding along with the presentation. Within minutes, it was as if nothing had happened. But I sat there, silent, my pulse pounding against my ribs. Inside me, the world had shifted. Outwardly, the explanation worked. It was plausible. A personal photo accidentally synced, a harmless mistake. Yet I knew, with the cold certainty that burns deeper than anger, that it was not a glitch. It was a crack in the facade, the first undeniable sign. I replayed the image in my mind, frame by frame. The way his arm wrapped around her waist. The relaxed tilt of her head, not startled or resistant but comfortable. The gleam of condensation on the mirror, proof that it wasn't staged but real, lived. I tried to tell myself that maybe there was some innocent explanation, that maybe I was overreacting. But the part of me that had doubted, that had noticed the subtle shifts in her behavior over the past months, knew better. When the session ended, I lingered in my seat as people filed out. Stephanie was surrounded by colleagues, smiling, shaking hands, radiating the same magnetic charm she always carried. From across the room, our eyes met briefly. Hers were steady, unwavering, as if daring me to challenge her in this setting. She gave me the faintest nod, like a signal that I should keep quiet, play along, not disrupt the performance. I left the ballroom with a weight pressing down on me, walking into the sharp chill of the Chicago morning. The city buzzed with its usual urgency, but I felt suspended, disconnected. The noise of traffic, the clatter of heels on pavement, the hum of conversation around me. All of it seemed distant, muted. What gnawed at me most wasn't just the image itself, but the way she had deflected it. How easily she had reshaped reality in that room. How quickly she had bent the perception of dozens of people, making the obvious look harmless, turning suspicion into laughter. That SK*LL, that mastery of control, was something I had admired in her before. Now it terrified me. For the rest of the day, I walked through meetings and conversations as if underwater, smiling when required, speaking when prompted, but all the while hearing the echo of that photograph in my head. It was the first clear sign, too sharp, too blatant to dismiss. And yet, because of her performance, I found myself doubting even my own certainty. Was I imagining things? Was I projecting? Was it really as obvious as I believed? That was her power, to make even the undeniable feel uncertain. And I realized, with a kind of slow, dawning dread, that this was only the beginning. On the flight back from Chicago, the photograph haunted me like an afterimage burned into my vision. No matter how many times I closed my eyes, the scene reassembled itself. The marble tiles, the Berg *NDY nails, the curve of her body leaning into someone who was not me. I tried to smother it with rationalizations, the possibility of an old picture, the absurd chance that it was a setup, a mistake in perception. But the more I tried, the more the cracks in her recent behavior began to show themselves in my memory. It was as if the photograph had unlocked a mental file I had been unwilling to open. The signs had been there for months. I could see them now with frightening clarity. I thought of the weekend she had told me she needed to attend a strategic offsite in Denver. It had seemed odd at the time, the way she booked it last minute, the vague explanations, the insistence that it was critical to her team's alignment. When she returned, she was full of stories about brainstorming exercises and late nights with spreadsheets, but she offered no photos, no details beyond cliches. At the time, I accepted it as part of the business. We both worked in demanding industries after all, but now, in hindsight, the story rang hollow. Then there was the matter of the shared location tracking. For years, we had both kept our devices linked, a practical arrangement born of convenience during travel. I remembered the first time I noticed hers had been disabled. We were supposed to meet at a dinner downtown, and I tried to check if she was on her way. The app showed nothing, just a blank gray circle. When I asked her later, she smiled and brushed it off as a settings issue after a software update. I wanted to believe her, but a part of me tightened. It never came back on. The phone habits shifted too. Stephanie, once casual with her device, began placing it face down whenever we were together. At dinners, in the living room, even on the nightstand, always screened to the table. At first, I thought little of it. Maybe she was trying to be more present, less distracted. But soon I noticed the subtle, sharp movements, the quick glance, the silent dismissal of notifications, the way she would angle the phone slightly away when she typed. Messages arrived at odd hours, and she would tilt the screen just enough to keep me from seeing. A new fragrance followed her home on certain nights. It wasn't the perfume I had given her, nor one I had ever noticed before. It was heavier, musky, lingering on her skin and clothes, clashing with the crisp scent of her professional attire. She claimed it was a sample from a colleague who was testing a new brand for a campaign. That explanation might have held if it hadn't been for the timing. The scent appeared only after late returns, after dinners with the team or client drinks. Then there were the purchases. I once stumbled across a receipt in her car, slipped between the seats. Lingerie from a boutique so expensive I had to look up the brand online. I waited weeks, expecting to see it, to be surprised by her in it, to have it become part of us. It never appeared. The bags she carried into the house on that day vanished into the hidden corners of her wardrobe. When I asked casually about new clothes, she waved it off, saying it was nothing, just basics for work. The financial records began to show similar shadows. While reviewing our joint account one evening, I noticed transfers labeled as marketing expenses. At first, they blended into the noise of professional reimbursements, but the amounts grew unusual. Large, repeated, always directed toward her personal accounts rather than the company card. When I asked her about one, she responded quickly, almost too quickly, with a polished answer about discretionary spending for project teams. Her explanation was plausible on the surface, but the tone was rehearsed, defensive. I recalled a night in early spring when she returned from a bar late, tipsy but trying to mask it. As she set her phone on the counter, it buzzed, and I saw the caller ID flash. Her boss's name. She grabbed it swiftly, fumbling slightly, and stepped into the other room. A few minutes later, she reemerged, composed, brushing off the call as a quick check-in. I let it slide, though unease prickled in my chest. Weeks later, by pure accident, she dialed me by mistake while out one evening. I answered to the muffled background of clinking glasses, laughter, and then unmistakably, her boss's voice, low and amused, followed by her own laughter. She must have realized the error because the line went dead almost instantly. And yet the next morning, she acted as if nothing had happened. She brewed coffee, read her emails, kissed me on the cheek, and slipped into her blazer with practiced ease. I tried to convince myself it had been nothing, that I had misheard. But memory has a way of resurfacing when the first undeniable sign breaks through, and now everything aligned. Her language had shifted as well. At social gatherings, where once she proudly introduced me as her husband, I began to notice subtle edits. "This is David," she would say, smiling at her colleagues, her hand brushing lightly against my arm but without the firmness of before. Sometimes she added, "We've been together for a while," in a tone that felt like downplaying rather than celebrating. I even overheard her once describe me as just David. Not malicious, perhaps, but dismissive in a way that stung more than I cared to admit. Another fragment surfaced. The quick showers at night. For years, we had shared routines, brushing teeth side by side, exchanging tired but content words as we prepared for bed. Lately, she had *N arriving home late, heading straight for the bathroom, and emerging minutes later in fresh pajamas, her hair damp, her skin carrying that unfamiliar fragrance masked under soap. When I reached for her, she turned with a tired smile, claiming exhaustion. Even small things became suspicious when pieced together. Checks from boutique hotels slipped into her purse. Notes scribbled in planners that didn't align with her public calendar. A string of cab receipts from neighborhoods where neither of us had reason to be. At the time, each of these had seemed isolated, explainable. I had filed them away, choosing trust over confrontation, convincing myself that doubt was worse than ignorance. But now, in the wake of that photograph, they assembled into a single, damning mosaic. Each fragment was a tile in a pattern I could no longer ignore. It was not just the possibility of infidelity that hollowed me out. It was the realization of how long I had lived with blinders on. The patterns had been there, hiding in plain sight, but I had chosen to see love, loyalty, partnership instead of deceit. And now, with the weight of that morning's presentation pressing against me, I could not unsee them. As I sat alone in our kitchen that night, the city quiet beyond the windows, I opened my laptop and began pulling records. Statements, receipts, notes, calendars. I stared at them until my eyes blurred, each line item a needle of betrayal. It was clear now. This wasn't a single slip or a fleeting mistake. This was deliberate, repeated, cultivated. The first sign in Chicago had been the spark. But this, the full pattern, was the fire. Boston had always been one of those cities that held a quiet kind of charm for me. A place of brick streets, old libraries, and a rhythm that balanced history with innovation. I had been there countless times for client meetings, walking through the cobblestone lanes near Beacon Hill or rushing into glass towers near the Seaport District. That week, however, the city became something entirely different. It became the stage where suspicion turned into truth. The morning had been ordinary on the surface. I had a slate of calls scheduled, then a meeting with an investor in Cambridge. Between commitments, I decided to stop by the co-working hub where Stephanie often claimed to spend time, strategizing with the team. It was a modern space, open layouts, glass walls, minimalist furniture, the kind of place startups used to project energy and transparency. Ironically, it was those transparent walls that destroyed the last fragment of denial I had been clinging to. I entered through the side entrance, using the guest keycard I had been given months earlier when I briefly used the same building for a project. The reception desk was empty, and the low murmur of conversations drifted from the common area. I walked quietly, my footsteps muffled by the industrial carpeting, until I reached the glass-walled conference rooms that lined the corridor. And then I saw them. Stephanie and Michael. There was no mistaking what I witnessed. They sat close together in one of the smaller meeting rooms, their laptops open but abandoned to the side. The posture, the proximity, the familiarity, it spoke of something beyond colleagues, beyond friendship. In the span of a breath, I watched as she leaned toward him, and he met her halfway. Their kiss was not tentative or exploratory. It was confident, assured, the kind of kiss two people share when secrecy has already become routine, when int asterisk Macy is no longer new but established. My stomach clenched as if I had been struck. I stood frozen, my body refusing to move, my mind scrambling to deny what my eyes confirmed. The way her hand rested on his chest, fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt, the relaxed tilt of her head, the ease in their movements. All of it screamed of familiarity. This was not a mistake, not a moment of weakness, not a misunderstanding. This was proof. For months, I had been haunted by suspicion, weaving together fragments, trying to convince myself that the mosaic might be coincidental. Now the picture was whole. There was no need for interpretation. The betrayal was real, physical, undeniable. I must have stood there longer than I realized, hidden in the shadow of the corridor, my hands trembling at my sides. My heart pounded so violently I thought they might hear it echo through the glass. I tried to breathe, but the air seemed thick, resisting me. Every instinct screamed to burst in, to confront, to demand an explanation. Yet another voice, colder, sharper, urged me to wait, to watch, to let the truth burn itself into memory so it could never again be erased. I noticed the little things, details that carved themselves into my mind. The half-empty cups of coffee on the table. The notes scribbled on a whiteboard, abandoned mid-thought. Her jacket draped casually over the back of the chair, as if she planned to be there a while. Michael's phone face up on the table, a string of unread messages glowing briefly before fading. Their gestures were what cut the deepest. The way she laughed softly into his shoulder. The way he brushed a strand of hair from her face, as if he had done it 100 times before. The way she squeezed his hand when their lips parted, a gesture so tender and domestic it might have belonged to a married couple. Only it wasn't ours anymore. I backed away slowly, retreating down the hall, my body numb, my vision blurring at the edges. I exited the building without them ever noticing me. Outside, the Boston air was brisk, the kind of chill that usually woke me up, but that morning it felt like nothing. I walked aimlessly through the streets, the city's hum of traffic and voices pressing around me. Yet I was alone inside a silence so absolute it roared. For hours I replayed the scene in my mind. Each time, I hoped the memory might alter, that perhaps I had misinterpreted. But it never did. It remained sharp, exact, seared into me. That kiss, that hand on his chest, that casual tenderness. The kind of Macy I had once thought belonged exclusively to us, was now irretrievably theirs. I thought back to every deflection, every excuse she had given. The strategic offsites, the late returns, the phone face down, the perfume, the boutique receipts, the laughter on accidental calls. Each one slid into place around this moment, forming a perfect circle of deceit. The photograph in Chicago had been the first explosion, but this was the crater left behind. That night, I sat alone in my hotel room, staring at the ceiling. The city lights painted faint stripes across the walls, but I felt buried in darkness. My hands still shook when I tried to write in my notebook. I wanted to capture the facts, to record them before doubt could creep back in. So I wrote it down, the time, the place, the gestures, the kiss. I described it clinically, like evidence, stripping away emotion so it would remain intact even when memory softened with time. Yet no matter how clinical I tried to be, emotion bled through. The words trembled on the page, my pen pressing too hard, letters digging grooves into the paper. Betrayal has a weight unlike any other, heavier than grief, sharper than anger, colder than fear. It draped itself over me, suffocating, unshakable. By morning, I had made a decision. I would not confront her immediately. She was too led at deflection, too adept at turning even damning evidence into plausible accidents. I had seen it in Chicago, the way she twisted perception, redirecting suspicion with a smile and a joke. If I stormed in now, she would find a way to diminish it, to plant doubt in my own mind again. No, I would wait. I would watch. I would gather every piece until there was no space left for lies. That resolution did not heal the wound, but it gave me a sliver of control. Standing at the window of the hotel room, watching Boston stir awake, I realized something had shifted inside me. I was no longer the man scrambling to rationalize or excuse. I was now the man who had seen with his own eyes. And once you have seen, you cannot unsee. Dallas greeted me with heat and glass. The corporate event was held on the rooftop of one of the city's new towers, a venue chosen to impress. Panoramic views stretching out across the skyline, string lights crisscrossing the open air, a live band softly playing while waiters circled with trays of cocktails. It should have been festive, the kind of night where business softened into celebration, where speeches were light-hearted and the horizon glittered like a promise. But for me, it became the place where private suspicion shifted into public humiliation. The evening started innocuously enough. I arrived in a tailored suit, carrying the practiced calm I had worn for years at such functions. I shook hands, exchanged smiles, spoke about projections and partnerships. Yet underneath it all, my mind churned with the images I could not erase. The photograph in Chicago, the kiss in Boston, the mosaic of behaviors that had converged into certainty. Stephanie was radiant as always, commanding the space with effortless charm. She laughed with colleagues, gestured with her wine glass, moved as if every spotlight was designed to find her. To the untrained eye, she appeared flawless, professional, magnetic, admired. But my eyes were no longer untrained. I saw the subtle touches, the lingering glances, the ways her hand brushed too comfortably against Michael's arm, the conspiratorial smiles exchanged across the room. The turning point came midway through the night during the speeches. Ryan, a senior colleague whose birthday was being folded into the celebration, stepped up to make a toast. He was a charismatic figure, known for his wit, and the crowd gathered close as he lifted his glass. At first, his words were standard fare: appreciation for the team, recognition of hard work, jokes about late nights and too much coffee. People laughed, nodded, clinked glasses. Then his tone shifted, almost imperceptibly at first. He smirked, glanced toward Stephanie, and said something that sliced through me like glass. And of course, some of us have been putting in extra hours, not just on projects, but on partnerships. Isn't that right, Stephanie? The room erupted in a mix of laughter and awkward coughs. Some faces turned curious, others knowingly amused. It was the kind of comment delivered as a joke, but carrying a weight everyone recognized as truth wrapped in humor. The collective reaction was worse than the words themselves. I saw colleagues exchanging glances, smirks, raised eyebrows. They knew, or at the very least, they suspected enough to find it funny. Stephanie's reaction betrayed her. For the briefest second, she froze. Her smile faltered. Her glass trembled slightly in her hand. Then she laughed, too loudly, too quickly, as if to cover the slip. But even as she laughed, her body language gave her away. Her hand instinctively touched Michael's arm, seeking reassurance, her eyes flickering toward him with an **Macy that could not be disguised. In that moment, the truth was no longer confined to photographs or stolen kisses. It was alive in the air, pulsing through the crowd, acknowledged without being spoken outright. The boundary between private betrayal and public perception had shattered. I felt the world tilt. The rooftop lights blurred. The music faded. The city skyline became a backdrop I could no longer appreciate. My chest burned, not with shock this time, but with the raw ache of confirmation. It was no longer just me who knew. It was them, the colleagues, the investors, the people whose opinions shaped reputations and futures. The humiliation was sharp, but beneath it lay something colder. Finality. Watching her laugh nervously, watching the way Michael's hand lingered at the small of her back, watching the way the crowd absorbed the insinuation without challenge. I knew then that our marriage, at least in the form I had once believed in, was over. I stayed through the rest of the speeches, though I heard little. Faces blurred as they moved past me. Voices washed into meaningless sound. My glass remained untouched in my hand, condensation dripping onto my cuff. At one point, Stephanie approached, slipping her arm briefly through mine as if nothing had happened, her smile bright for the cameras. The gesture felt like performance, a shield against perception rather than a genuine connection. Inside, I had already left. Later, as the night stretched on and laughter rose around me, I stood near the edge of the rooftop, looking out over the endless lights of Dallas. The city pulsed with life, but I felt hollow, a ghost standing among the living. I thought of the years we had built together, the promises exchanged, the mornings shared, and I thought of how quickly, how easily, it had unraveled. Not in dramatic fights or catastrophic events, but in whispers, touches, jokes at a rooftop party. That was the cruelty of it. Betrayal had not just stolen **Macy. It had stolen dignity, leaving me exposed under the gaze of others. And yet, in that exposure, something hardened within me. I felt a line draw itself across my life, before this night, and after it. By the time the party ended and guests began to filter out, I had already made a decision. I would not confront her there. I would not create a scene or beg for truth. The spectacle had already happened, and it had been enough. From that night forward, I would shift my focus. Not on saving what was broken, but on protecting what remained. My integrity, my future, my control. When we left the rooftop together, her laughter still echoing with colleagues, I walked silently beside her. To anyone watching, we looked like a couple leaving hand in hand, as we had done countless times before. But inside, something had died. And once dead, it could not be revived. The rooftop in Dallas had marked the point of no return. By the time Stephanie and I returned to our hotel suite that night, my silence was a wall she could not climb. She chattered about colleagues, about how successful the evening had been, about the investor who promised to circle back on a proposal. Her tone was smooth, confident, as if nothing had shifted. But I heard none of it. I had already stepped into a new role. Not a husband clinging to trust, but a strategist preparing for survival. I did not argue. I did not accuse. To do so would have been to give her another opportunity to twist, to deflect, to recast reality the way she had in Chicago. I had seen her talent for performance too many times. She could transform exposure into a joke, suspicion into misunderstanding. If I confronted her now, she would only try to make me question myself again. And I was done with that. Instead, I began my work quietly, methodically. The first step was documentation. In the days after Dallas, while she immersed herself in meetings and conference calls, I compiled a record. I saved copies of our joint financial statements, printing and encrypting them. I created a timeline of her suspicious trips, her late nights, the receipts that had vanished into drawers. I wrote down dates and locations with precision, attaching them to emails I stored in an account she did not know existed. Every note was evidence. Every detail was a safeguard against manipulation. Next came the finances. For years, we had operated under the assumption of shared trust. Our accounts were linked, our assets intertwined. But that trust had become a vulnerability. Quietly, without raising alarms, I shifted portions of my liquidity into a trust account in my name only. It was not an act of revenge, it was preservation. If her choices jeopardized the stability we had built, I would not allow myself to be dragged down with her. I also began restricting her access. Where once I had left passwords saved and doors unlocked, I now moved with caution. I reset logins, enabled two-factor authentication, created firewalls around the systems she had once navigated freely. My work, the servers, the client portfolios, the intellectual property I had spent years cultivating, became protected by layers she could not breach. She might have eroded our personal life, but she would not take my professional one. The process was strangely calming. Each change, each precaution, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. It was not loud or dramatic, but steady, deliberate. The kind of work one does when the storm has already passed, and the rebuilding must begin. I also reached out, discreetly, to a compliance consultant I trusted. Under the guise of a routine audit, I requested a review of the agency's financial structures. I needed to know if her personal entanglements had bled into professional ones, if company funds were being funneled improperly, if conflicts of interest threatened stability. The consultant agreed, unaware of the personal weight behind my request. For me, it was not just about business. It was about uncovering how deep her duplicity ran. At night, lying beside her in silence, I listened to her breathing and thought of the duplicity of appearances. To the world, we were still a couple. We attended dinners, smiled for photographs, signed contracts together. But beneath that veneer, I was already gone, retreating into a space where her reach could not follow. Stephanie must have sensed something, though she never named it. She would glance at me sometimes with a flicker of unease, as if testing whether I had *n to see through her performance. She grew sharper in her words, more defensive in casual exchanges, quick to accuse me of being distant. I let her. Better she think me withdrawn than realize I was already restructuring the battlefield beneath her feet. There were moments when the weight of it all pressed heavily on me. Alone in my office, I would stare at our photographs. Vacations, anniversaries, **ts of a life that had once felt whole. I would feel the ache of betrayal, the raw wound of love turned sour. But then I would remember the rooftop in Dallas, the laughter of her colleagues, the way Michael's hand lingered at her back, and the ache hardened into resolve. This was no longer about heartbreak. It was about survival. I started to plan beyond the immediate. I considered where I would live if separation became inevitable. A cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains came to mind, a place we had once visited briefly, a place of silence and distance. I imagined myself there, surrounded by trees instead of her lies, finding clarity in solitude. I also began reaching out to advisors in quiet, coded ways. A lawyer I trusted received a casual email framed as a hypothetical scenario. What protections existed in the case of infidelity? What steps could be taken to shield business assets? The reply was measured, professional, but between the lines it gave me what I needed. Confirmation that my instincts were correct, that preparation was not paranoia but prudence. The more I acted, the calmer I felt. Where once I had been consumed by doubt and humiliation, now I moved with purpose. Each encrypted file, each secured account, each documented receipt became a stone in the foundation of a new reality. I was not powerless. I was not at her mercy. Stephanie, meanwhile, carried on as if nothing had changed. She attended meetings, traveled for projects, came home late with that same musky perfume clinging to her skin. She laughed at dinners, scrolled through her phone with the screen angled away, whispered into late-night calls I pretended not to hear. Perhaps she believed I remained blind. Perhaps she believed the illusion still held. But I knew better. The night before she left for another so-called offsite, I sat at my desk long after midnight, the glow of the monitor casting shadows across the room. In front of me was the growing archive. Photographs, receipts, transfers, emails. I scrolled through it slowly, the story assembling itself with brutal clarity. It was no longer a mosaic of suspicion. It was a ledger of betrayal. And I realized then that my silence was not weakness. It was strategy. In Dallas, the public crack had humiliated me. But in the quiet that followed, I had begged *N to build something stronger. Not reconciliation, not forgiveness, but boundaries, protection. A plan that would ensure her choices did not destroy me. It was not the end yet, but it was the beginning of mine. Michael resigned within days, citing personal reasons. Investors, sensing scandal, threatened to pull funding if conflicts were confirmed. Suddenly Stephanie's access was revoked. Passes denied, projects reassigned, calls unanswered. Her influence shrank overnight. No dramatic explosion, just silence and absence. Her reputation dissolving like mist until colleagues barely spoke her name. I withdrew to a cabin at the foot of the Blue Ridge, surrounded by quiet pines. I restructured the business, rebuilt routines, found steadiness in distance. Weeks later, a letter arrived. Stephanie's confession, half apology, half plea. I folded it unread into a drawer. Some endings don't need words. The documents, the boundaries, the silence, those were answer enough.